and welcome to the Journal of Ecology vodcast about the paper Short-Term Climate Change Manipulation Effects Do Not Scale Up to Long-Term Legacies, Effects of an Absent Snow Cover on Boreal Forest Plants. Boreal forests are shaped by a distinct seasonality with cold winters, but then also a persistent and thick snow cover during the winters, which basically acts like a blanket and can insulate the soil and the understory plants against the cold air temperatures. But with climate change and then more precipitation as rain instead of snow in the warmer winters, the snow cover is actually predicted to decrease in many areas, for example in northern Scandinavia where we work. So we wanted to find out how the absence of snow affects plant biomass, growth and phenology above and below ground. And for that we worked in a long-term snow removal experiment of 11 years. And we specifically wanted to include root responses because they are suggested as drivers for many biogeochemical changes that happen with more soil frost, but they're hardly ever measured, at least not in mature forest systems. And then we also wanted to see whether or not the changes that we could observe after 11 years could actually also have been predicted after just 1 or 2 years, or whether or not you need these long-term experiments to actually see the long-term changes. And we think that is especially important in systems where we have very long-lived species, such as the boreal forest. So to check that, we set up basically the whole experiment again and then asked whether or not there are differences between the long-term and short-term manipulations. And one advantage of looking at these or comparing short and long-term manipulations side by side, instead of, for example, looking at the first year of a study and then the same study after 11 years, is that actually all the background parameters that we did not manipulate, they stay the same. So if you have changes, for example, in precipitation or background temperature or in herbivory levels, all of those could differ over the length of the study, but if you have the experiment, the long and short-term manipulation at the same time, then actually you can exclude kind of these confounding factors. So the snow manipulations were done by these wooden constructions that then had tarp on top, and all the snow over the winter basically fell on top of the tarp instead of onto the plots. So the snow was absent from the plots over the whole winter. And then in spring, when the snow melt started, these tarps were slit so that actually all the meltwater entered the plots. So it was similar water balance between the control and the manipulated plots. And I don't have time to go into all the response parameters that we measured, but I want to start with the visible frost damage on 2 very important understory species. The first one is bilberry and then the second one lingonberry. And both of them showed quite strong visible frost damage. And this was, interestingly enough, almost nothing in the control. So the snow was very effective in protecting these understory dwarf shrubs against the cold air temperatures. But then we saw really a lot of damage in the short-term snow removal in the light gray bars, but then only a little bit of damage in the long-term snow removal in the dark gray bars. So basically those individuals that had already been exposed to the severe frost for 11 years, they were much less damaged than the ones that experienced the frost for the first time. And then moving on to root responses, we measured root growth and phenology with mini rhizotrons. These are transparent tubes that are inserted into the soil at an angle. And then you have a camera that you can put into the tube and then basically take pictures of the same spots at reoccurring times. So you see the tube soil interface and then the roots that are growing there. And by going back to the same spot, you can really look how individual roots grew over time. And we did the sampling every 3 weeks for the growing season. And then what we saw was that the root length over time was, first of all, quite a lot reduced in the long-term snow removal, which is the dark circles compared to the control in the open squares. But then also that the phenology of the 3 different treatments was roughly similar. So the production patterns didn't change much between the treatments, even though we did see that the control started a bit earlier, about 3 to 6 weeks than the other treatments. But then what I found really interesting is that we could see that basically the control and the short-term snow removal in the light gray circles, they started out at approximately the same amount of root length. But then over the season they diverged, which really neatly shows that the root growth was impaired by the soil frost. But then also if you look at the end of the season there and you compare how much the root length was reduced in the short-term snow removal after just 1 year compared to the control, and then how much it was reduced after 11 years, it's actually quite obvious that the reduction of the first year is stronger than what you would think after 11 years, or the other way around. If you only would have the short-term snow removal and would predict how much root growth or root length would be left after 11 years of this treatment, you would think that there would be much less roots than we actually observed. And this we also saw in some of the other response parameters. So as take-home messages, first of all, yes, severe frost does significantly affect boreal vegetation, both above and below ground. It reduces vascular plant biomass above and below ground, it decreases plant shoot growth and root growth, and it also induces this visible frost damage. But then also, yes, the short and long-term manipulation affect response parameters differently. So first of all, one extreme winter can already induce ecologically significant changes. But then also, if we would only have looked at the short-term experiment alone, it would have over-predicted long-term impacts. So there were a few response parameters that were stronger in the short-term experiment, such as the visible frost damage, and then other response parameters that, while they were stronger in the long-term snow removal, they were still less strong than what you would have predicted after just 1 year. And we think that this stronger response in the short-term experiment was mainly in some possibly plastic parameters, which show basically that there has been some kind of adaptation or maybe survival of only those individuals that can cope with these extreme conditions in the long-term treatment. And as I said, we have measured much more response parameters that I couldn't go into here, so if you're interested in this, I strongly encourage you to read the paper, which you can find on the Journal of Ecology homepage. Thank you.